We've all heard of the Anglo-Saxons, but did the Anglo-Saxons really take over Britain? According to the traditional story, the Anglo-Saxons were Germanic peoples who arrived in Britain in the 5th century AD. They were mercenaries from three different groups, the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes, hailing from modern-day northern Germany, Denmark, and the Netherlands. Their arrival is described by a 6th century British historian called Gildas. Then all the councillors, together with that proud tyrant Vortigern, the British king, were so blinded that, as a protection to their country, they sealed its doom by inviting in among them, like wolves into the sheepfold, the fierce and impious Saxons, a race hateful both to God and men, to repel the invasions of the northern nations. Nothing was ever so pernicious to our country, nothing was ever so unlucky. They first landed on the eastern side of the island by the invitation of the unlucky king, and there fixed their sharp talons, apparently to fight in favour of the island, but alas, more truly against it. Their motherland, finding her first brood thus successful, sends forth a larger company of her wolfish offspring, which, sailing over, join themselves to their bastard-born comrades. This interpretation has been aggressively challenged more recently. So, for example, in a 2021 book, Dr. James Harland has argued that the traditional view is somewhat naive. He says, "A more critical generation of historians, influenced by, among other things, anthropological and sociological theory, as well as post-structuralist literary criticism, have taken this thoroughly to task, highlighting that the older approaches could often display considerable naivety in their understanding of the genre conventions, textual purpose, and other contexts crucial to properly understanding these sources. These scholars have created a new body of source criticism that now renders it impossible for the informed and careful reader to simply take the content of these sources at face value." Now, I don't know about you, but I'm always on guard when I read rhetoric like this. So he's saying that historians and scholars were terribly naive in the past, but nowadays we are much more sensible, much more critical. And there's also a bit of bullying going on, isn't there? A bit of mild bullying, where he talks about the informed and careful reader. So it's similar to saying all sincere readers will agree with X, Y, Z. But why not just let the readers form their own opinions? Why do we have to nudge them in this way? But rhetoric aside, there is some substance to Harland's arguments. So he suggests, for example, that ethnicity is a cultural construct, and there is some truth to this. So ethnicity, language, culture, character, these are all different things, aren't they? They can overlap. Sometimes a population with a shared heritage can have similar cultural traits as well, but not necessarily. There are many examples where this isn't the case. But really, at the end of the day, it all boils down to an empirical question. Was there a mass migration of Germanic peoples to Britain in the 5th century, or wasn't there? The problem with the argument that there was only small-scale or elite migration to Britain in this period is then how do we explain the massive cultural changes that occurred? So a new language, new customs, new styles of burial, and so forth. In 2013, Nicholas Hyam and Martin Ryan gave a balanced view when they said that the evidence favours large-scale population continuity alongside significant migration. So they kind of tried to have it both ways. But even this softened interpretation has had a massive hole blown in it by recent archaeogenetics research. In September 2022, an article was published in Nature entitled "The Anglo-Saxon Migration and the Formation of the Early English Gene Pool." And the authors of this study analysed nearly 300 medieval skeletons from England, and they were aiming to see which haplogroups they belong to. So a haplogroup is an identifiable genetic population that shares a common ancestor. And they found something really interesting. They found out that after the Stone Age and before the Anglo-Saxon conquest, ancient peoples in Britain shared basically the same genetic material. So as they write, before the Middle Ages, post-Neolithic individuals from Britain and Ireland carried overwhelmingly the major Y chromosomal haplogroup R1b P312. And they also found that about the time of the Anglo-Saxon conquest, lots of new genetic material was introduced into the mix. They say, By contrast, the early medieval population of England exhibits a substantial fraction of continental-derived haplotypes, belonging to haplogroups R1b U106, R1a M420, I2A1 L460, and I1 M253, which are commonly found in northern and central Europe. And they estimated that on average, the medieval samples derived 86% of their ancestry from continental northern Europe. The picture is also complicated somewhat, so the authors also established that there was also substantial migration to Britain from continental northern Europe before the Romans left in the early 5th century. And that really harmonizes with what many scholars thought anyway, so it was already quite well established that there was some Germanic migration to Britain before the Romans left. But essentially, this data is stunning, isn't it? So it seems to prove beyond a doubt that there really was a mass migration to Britain from the continental northern Europe starting from the 5th century. So if indeed there was this great migration, why have scholars been so keen to argue the opposite? Why have they been so eager to argue that there was only small-scale elite migration? Well, I think in part it comes down to ideology and politics, doesn't it? So the idea that there was this great Anglo-Saxon invasion, it sounds to some people suspiciously like the Nazi view that Britain and Germany share a common Aryan heritage. As Harland writes, "We have surely already entered alarming analytical territory when we presume that it is possible to quantify the degree to which one's genetic material can be said to possess an Anglo-Saxon origin." But I would suggest that it's not a very good idea for intellectuals to shape their research around the kind of stories which we think it's safe for the public to hear. Really, we just have to establish the truth and the facts as accurately as possible about the past, and then to allow that information to go and take its chances in the world. All information can be misused and abused, but ultimately, true history is one of the best antidotes to ideology that there is. So that's all I've got for today. Thank you for watching, and I hope to make more videos for you like this in the future.